We all know that Labour wants an easy life when it comes to Muslim gangs. I'll explain why I have to say that in a minute. But in this video, I'm going to go through some of the politicians that I personally know have deliberately covered up these grooming gangs and go through the reasons why I think that they should be in the doghouse about this. Some of them are alive, some of them are dead, and Sadiq Khan, of course, will be at the end of the video. Hello everyone, this is Andre Walker. Thanks so much for watching this video. Please do subscribe, but more importantly, hit the bell notification icon. It's the best way to absolutely guarantee you get all my videos as soon as they are released. Right, before you complain, I just want to say to you that it's Orthodox Christmas Eve tomorrow, therefore the Christmas tree is still up. We're not complete lunatics in this household. In fact, I think the 12 days of Christmas takes me on to the 18th of January. So if it's still up halfway through January, you can't have a go at me. But jokes aside, this is a really important topic. The other day on my show on Talk, I had Simon Danczuk on. He's the former Labour MP for Rochdale and he's the Reform candidate in the by-election for Rochdale. Now, some of you don't like him and the reason is because during his divorce, he stupidly tried to chat up a 17-year-old girl and got into a lot of trouble. But what I will say to you is, it's entirely legal to do that. There was no suggestion they had any relations, and in any case, the age of consent is 16. So when some people say he's as bad as the people that we're talking about, he absolutely is not as bad as the people that we're talking about. There's a big difference between what has taken place with him and what has taken place, the complete illegality, the criminality, the dreadful stuff that went on with these gangs. Now, before I start, I want to explain to you what he said, but before I even do that, I want to say to you that some of you have asked me why I keep referring to these as grooming gangs. The reason is YouTube go crazy about the R word, YouTube go crazy about some of the graphic details, and I can't give you the information I want to give you unless I use euphemisms. I'm really sorry about that. But anyway, Danczuk was on my show and he explained to me about two Labour MPs, Jim Dobbin and Tony Lloyd. Jim Dobbin was the next door member of parliament to Rochdale. Now remember, the majority of the people that had behaved in this way were from Rochdale, but the victims were from Hayward and Middleton. Jim Dobbin took Simon Danczuk to one side in 2012. He'd been a member of parliament for 2 years, and he said, don't mention anything about the race of these people. Let's keep it quiet. You'll lose votes off it. Now, can you imagine being in a position where hundreds of your constituents have said they've been hard? Hundreds of them have said they've been kidnapped. Hundreds of them have said that they've been trafficked. Hundreds of them have said that they've been exploited in all manner of ways, been given drugs and all this sort of thing. And you are saying, keep it down, let's not offend community relations. Now, Jim Dobbin was knighted by the Pope. And I think real is a real wrong. And I mean, he's dead now, but I'm not going to say God rest his soul. And I'll tell you the reason why. Because he had that job. And the reality was, he was just a party boy. He enjoyed the social side of being a member of parliament, the social side of being a member of parliament, and he wasn't interested in genuinely supporting his constituents. I think that that is completely risible, and he was one of the people that not only tried to attack Simon Danczuk, but also tried to beg him not to talk about the race or religion of the perpetrator. And by the way, when we're talking about Simon Danczuk sending text messages to a 17-year-old girl, do not delude yourself into believing that that scandal wasn't whipped up because they wanted to discredit him on the subject of these grooming gangs. Anyway, he's now happily married, having got rid of the second wife, who was a bit of a, well, things went badly wrong between them. I want to then talk about Tony Lloyd. Tony Lloyd was another veteran Labour MP, also deceased, but he later became the Police and Crime Commissioner for Manchester. He made a speech in 2012 in which he started talking about how Jimmy Savile was responsible for the grooming gangs. And what he was saying was simply this: in Britain, there is an R culture. We don't actually have a major problem with uncontrolled immigration. This has got nothing to do with the issues of racism, of segregation, of closed ethnic communities, of attitudes that are different to Britain. It's that Britain has an R culture and every single man is a potential perpetrator. That was Tony Lloyd's view, once again completely ignoring the issue. So now we're talking about in Rochdale, the Member of Parliament's trying to complain, but the Labour Party won't let him. The victim's own MP is against doing anything about it. And of course, the Police and Crime Commissioner for Greater Manchester, Tony Lloyd, he is also trying to cover up exactly what was going on. Now, I should say, Sir Peter Fahey, the Chief Commissioner, the Chief Constable rather, of the Greater Manchester Police, he also turned up to a public meeting and he said, I want to first of all say that I'm here to celebrate multiculturalism. No, you're not. You're there because grooming gangs are running amok in Manchester. I think Sir Peter Fahey, who drummed out the people that tried to whistle-blow about all this, should be prosecuted. And I'll tell you why. Because it's a criminal offence for a police officer to ignore a criminal offence. And so I think Sir Peter Fahey should go to prison. But he isn't a Labour politician, so I don't want to... Sorry, let me try that again. He isn't officially a Labour politician, so let's not have him on this list. He is, in fact, in reality, I think, a Labour politician. But then, the reason I wanted to make this video was sit back at the back of my mind and I was thinking about, God, there was a documentary in 2003, which was all about gangs in Keighley. At the time, Lee Jasper, who was director of the Greater London Authority, i.e. one of the principal special advisors to Ken Livingstone when he was Mayor of London, he was campaigning vociferously with his organisation, which was the forerunner to Black Lives Matter, to prevent people from talking about it. Now, admittedly, the people talking about this were people like Nick Griffin. Well, look, at the end of the day, I'm not a supporter of the BNP. I don't like a great deal of what they say. But at the end of the day, the man was telling the truth, whereas Lee Jasper was lying. And so I want to add to this list Lee Jasper and Ken Livingstone, because they were desperately trying, once again, to prevent this TV documentary coming about. Now, remember, that's 2003. The first story, I think, in the Times was 2011. And it really started kicking off in 2017. So you are talking about a good 8 years of offending taking place in between that first television documentary that really sank without trace because of people like Lee Jasper. And I think that we've got to remember that. And we've got to say that people they don't have blood on their hands, do they? No. But they have behaved in a manner that was so irresponsible that we cannot possibly tolerate it. By the way, I've said on previous videos, when you're talking about the number of victims of crime, there are two axes, aren't there? There's number of offenders and length of time they've had to offend. If you effectively turn around, as Sir Peter Fahey did, as Tony Lloyd did, as Jim Dobbin did, as Lee Jasper and Ken Livingstone did, if you turn around and say, well, if you're Pakistani Muslim, you're never going to be arrested for this and you're never going to be prosecuted for this, then in fact, the number of offences will increase, not because the number of offenders has increased, but the amount of time they've been allowed to do it has massively, massively increased. And then, of course, let's come on to Keir Starmer. I am sick of hearing how Keir Starmer, it didn't come across my desk personally. Right. As Director of Public Prosecutions, for which he received a knighthood, this man failed at every single challenge. What happened to the prosecution of Savile? What happened to the prosecution of Starmer? What happened to the prosecutions of all of these grooming gangs? Well, none of it seemed to have taken place. Keir Starmer, in a training video to the Crown Prosecution Service, said that as Director of Public Prosecutions, all the big things came across his desk. Well, that doesn't seem to be true at all. Or maybe it is true. And in fact, he was just keen to cover things up. Look, the Crown Prosecution Service was established by Margaret Thatcher. Prior to the Crown Prosecution Service, what would happen is the police inspector would decide whether you were charged or not. Good bit of localism, that, by the way. The police inspector would decide whether you're charged, and even in the early days of the trial, the early days of the case, things like magistrates' courts or whatever, he would actually represent the Crown on those occasions, which I think is a great idea. And the reason is because the Crown Prosecution Service came in after the Guildford 4 and the Birmingham 6 because of concerns about police independence. Well, that's fine, except for the fact that the Director for Public Prosecutions and the Crown Prosecution Service, who are supposed to prosecute without fear or favour, didn't do that. They favoured Pakistani Muslim grooming gangs. They gave them favouritism by not prosecuting them, and they also they feared people like Jimmy Savile and Mohammed Al-Fayed. And I think part of the reason that Jess Phillips is so determined not to have a public inquiry now is because what would they say about the role of Keir Starmer? Even if you ignore Jim Dobbin, Tony Lloyd, Ken Livingstone and Lee Jasper, all of them are up to their necks in it. But now I want to talk a little bit about Sadiq Khan. Look, I can't say to you with a degree of certainty that Sadiq Khan has covered up any of these offences, but he has been the Mayor of London and Police and Crime Commissioner, because the two roles are merged in London. They're now merged again in Greater Manchester, actually, but that's a side issue. Why is it that no action has been taken? Is it that this problem exists in Oxford? It exists in Rotherham, it exists in Oldham, it exists in Bristol, it exists right across the country. But in London, strangely, we are immune from that. Well, don't worry, that's not true. Because in fact, this offence has been investigated. A Stratford gang was broken up. But what about Tooting? With its large Muslim Pakistani population, are we saying that this has not happened in Tooting? And we know how connected Sadiq Khan is with the Muslim community in Tooting. He's from Tooting for a start, which is fairly obvious. But also, he stood by when Ahmadiyyan Muslims all lost their jobs in Tooting, when they're effectively religiously cleansed out of the area. Just to explain, Ahmadiyyan Islam is it's a slightly strange religion that people who are Anglo-Asian tend to believe. People whose dad might have been a British soldier back in the day and mother was a Muslim girl. And it kind of is a hybrid of Christianity and Islam. Nonetheless, Muslims don't like them. And they were kicked out of all of their jobs in Tooting. And Sadiq Khan stood by and did nothing. Once again, Sadiq Khan is standing by and doing nothing. Now, he will try and deflect blame elsewhere, as he's attempted to do with the KNIFE crime issue. But the reality is, I think that he has to take responsibility for what's going on. And I know that you're going to say to me, well, hang on a second, you're not giving any specific examples of Sadiq Khan being guilty of a cover-up. No, I'm not. But at the same time, are you telling me that there are no examples of this taking place in London? That Samark Rowley knows of nothing, Sadiq Khan knows of nothing? Or is it going on in London and this cover-up continues to take place? Because let's go all the way back to Lee Jasper and his chums in 2003. We are still 21 years later, 22 years later, nowhere near actually getting to the bottom of this. And I'm being told by people that this is still going on right up and down the country. The reason is because real action has never been taken. 1 in every 75 Pakistani Muslim men in Britain have been arrested for this crime, a truly astonishing number. What is it, 1.5% or something like that? This is a real problem, and it's Labour that are responsible for this. And the reason they're responsible for this is because they've prioritised electoral need ahead of the needs of the public. Well, they knighted Sadiq Khan, and I believe that's because there are now 5 Islamist MPs in Parliament, and what they want to do is venerate him and make him the #1 most significant Muslim politician in Britain. If he is that person, then he needs to lead the way on cleaning out this problem, but he will not do it. What he will do is hold other people responsible. Well, I don't say rest in peace to Tony Lloyd and Jim Dobbin, and I'm sorry that the Pope, who's the leader of my church, even though earlier I told you about the Orthodox thing, I'm sorry that he knighted him, and I'm sorry for what has taken place. But what I'm sorry more than anything else is that people like Tommy Robinson went on and about this for a long time. I wonder whether the EDL would have existed, whether the Luton Defence League would have existed, whether the character Tommy Robinson would have existed if politicians in the Labour Party and beyond had done anything about these grooming gangs. They didn't. And I think that we are paying an enormous price for that. And I'll tell you something else. An enormous price is also being paid by the genuine, moderate and sensible Muslims in this country who are tarred with the same brush. Because I am yet to see an example of a mosque turning round and saying, please let a member of our community off with any criminal offence. I don't think that happened. Now, I think they object to being collectively punished for something that was done by one or two people. But this claim by the police that they did it all to keep the mosques happy, I think bears absolutely no water whatsoever. That is my list of Labour politicians. You will have others. Why don't you put your names in the description? I'd really appreciate it. And until next time, goodbye.